Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the shadow tree, and if you don't know what we're looking at here with these two talent trees, if you don't know why there's two or what's going on with all these different nodes and things, then go ahead and watch my most recent video where I talk about the priest tree. In the beginning of that video I explain how these talent trees are going to work in Shadowlands, or not in Shadowlands, in Dragonflight, why they look like this, some of the nuances, stuff like that. So if you're just not sure in general, this is your first time looking at any of these talent trees, they're not, I mean, they're pretty straightforward, but it's not completely clear. There's some weird stuff, so go ahead and watch that video and come back to this one if you want to watch me talk about the shadow tree. So let's just get right into it and talk about the shadow tree. Unlike the priest tree, you don't get anything for free. So in the shadow tree, everything just starts out with 0. On the priest tree, you got death or shadow word death for free, right? But on the shadow tree, you don't get anything. So you have to take Mind Flay initially, and then once you have Mind Flay, you've got 3 choices. You can take Vampiric Touch, Devouring Plague, and Mind Seer. Any combination of the 3, like I mentioned in my last video, you can not take some or take all of them or whatever you want to do, but you have to take at least one or you can't get to the rest of the talents, right? And because you don't have to choose all 3, I mean, you're likely to choose all 3 anyway, right? Like, these spells are pretty core to a Shadow Priest, which is why they're at the top like this. But like you don't technically have to take Vampiric Touch, although I don't know why you ever wouldn't. Same with Mind Seer, you could technically like take Vampiric Touch and work your way down the tree without ever taking Mind Seer. And Devouring Plague doesn't even unlock anything, so if you don't want to play with Devouring Plague, you just don't have to, right? Likely you're going to take all 3 anyway for most scenarios, although maybe, not taking Devouring Plague, for example, might give you a point to spend on something crazy down at the bottom, although it's very unlikely that getting rid of Devouring Plague is going to be a good idea. Although it depends on tuning, I guess. So yeah, those are your next 3. You've got Vampiric Touch, Devouring Plague, Mind Seer. Then in the next row, row 3, we've got Death and Madness. And then you have a choice between Mind Bomb and Psychic Voice. This one's pretty interesting. We typically would just, like, through pretty much all of Shadowlands, I was just playing Psychic Scream or Psychic Horror. So I like never took Mind Bomb, really. There were people who played it on Anduin, but it has like very niche situations outside of PvP, I guess. In PvP, Mind Bomb gets a decent amount of play, but outside of PvP and like PvE, Mind Bomb really is not taken very often, right? It's usually better to just have a single target stun, or because it was on the same row as your silence reduction, last word or whatever it's called. Yeah, last word. Sometimes you would not take Mind Bomb and then you would take last word so that you'd have more kicks, right? But with this row, you're going to be able to take Mind Bomb and silence if you would like, and you can even take last word. So this is one of the interesting things where before you could only have Mind Bomb or Psychic Horror or silence, or your last word, right, where your silence is on a shorter cooldown. But with them splitting the tree up like this, you can now technically take all 3, actually, where you have last word and Mind Bomb and Psychic Horror. So this could open up a lot of potential in Mythic Plus, where you can, maybe we become CC gods, right? Where you stun a whole pack, and then a little bit after that, one of them starts casting the big scary ability that you need to stun. So you stun it again with Psychic Horror, and then it's going to do it again. So you Psychic Scream and fear them all away. And then it's going to do it again, and you just kick it with your cooldown of silence that's back up because it's 15 seconds shorter. So this is going to be pretty cool, I think. Obviously, none of those spells do damage, so they're not going to be priority number 1 if you're looking for damage. But I think it's interesting that you can have so much utility, whereas before you couldn't, right? So yeah, so you have this choice between Mind Bomb and Psychic Voice. Psychic Scream is another one of those spells that like has very niche use cases. There are times, especially in PvP, it gets used a lot in PvP, but in PvE it's like usually we're a ranged class, so we're usually not in melee with things that we can scream away, unless you like run in and then scream and then run back out usually. So it's been kind of hard to find really good uses of Psychic Scream, but maybe maybe Psychic Scream does something different in Dragonflight, or maybe they spice it up a little bit and make it so that you want to play Psychic Voice more often. And I don't think that it's necessary that you choose one of these two, except for the things that they unlock. Like, for example, Vampiric Embrace. You cannot have Vampiric Embrace unless you take either Mind Bum or Psychic Voice. So it's mostly a travel node where neither effect here is like crazy impactful, but the things that they unlock are pretty impactful. So you may or may not use this. Probably just use it to travel. Next, we've got the big choice that's pretty controversial. You have to choose between Misery or Searing Nightmare. And the other caveat, you don't have to take either. But yeah, so this is one of the things where I don't love how they did this. I think Misery is a cool spell, a cool talent. I think it's really... having your Vampiric Touch also apply Shadow Word Pain, I think is pretty much across the board good, because then it takes less globals to put dots on things. And we already... Like, dot classes already have a hard time because they have to put dots on so many things. And then you kind of ramp, and there's this whole issue of other classes just doing 1 billion damage off the bat. Destruction Warlock. But, like, with other dot classes, you have to, like, build up, and then you can finally start doing damage, right? And so, reducing the amount of globals it takes to put all your dots out, in general, is a good thing. So I like Misery, but that also applies to Searing Nightmare. But the problems with Searing Nightmare are very heavily outweigh the benefits, right? Searing Nightmare can put an infinite amount of Shadow Word Pains on things as long as they're all stacked close enough, right? There's no target cap to how many things you can put Shadow Word Pain on with one Searing Nightmare. But the fact that Searing Nightmare can only be cast while you're channeling Mind Seer sucks. The fact that it turns the rotation into just Mind Seer, Searing Nightmare, and then you repeat those 3 spells 1,000 times. Not very fun, right? You can't really move while you're doing it. So the design behind Searing Nightmare in general is just not great. And although the idea of putting like pain on a bunch of stuff, I do like. It's very similar to Seed of Corruption from an Affliction Warlock, where you just hit one spell, then you can do other things because it puts dots on everything that's in a clump. So at a very basic level, I think Searing Nightmare, the idea of putting on dots on a lot of things, good. Everything else about the spell, pretty much bad. So yeah, you have to choose, or you can choose between Misery and Searing Nightmare. Likely, I think a lot of people will try to steer away from Searing Nightmare, and hopefully Searing Nightmare is tuned in such a way that maybe the second applications of Shadow Word Pain that are supposed to do more damage, right? Maybe those don't do more damage, or they do just a little more damage or something like that. So where we have better choices in AoE, especially considering we can be playing Shadow Flame Prism without having spent any shadow points. Maybe we're going to start building around Shadow Flame Prism, especially when you start to get to the bottom here in the Shadow Tree and look at some of the other Mindbender, Shadow Fiend talents that you can take. I could foresee a Mindbender, Shadow Fiend build that does just as much damage as Searing Nightmare related builds without having to play Searing Nightmare while you get to play Misery or something, right? So that's your other option. Then you've got Silence. So Silence won't be baseline anymore, which sucks, but it sucks that you have to put a point into here. You only have 30 points, right? So it sucks that you have to lose a point to get Silence, especially because you have to take Silence for pretty much any progression fight, anything that's hard, because if you don't get Dispersion. And Dispersion is just not something you can not have, right? Dispersion you must have, basically. So you are almost forced into taking Silence, and by proxy, you're pretty much forced into taking Mind Seer, because if you don't take Mind Seer, you can't take Silence, and if you don't take Silence, you can't take Dispersion. So this kind of thing where you have to choose some not great spells like Mind Seer is pretty much only good for generating Insanity. Also, this tooltip doesn't say that it generates Insanity, which is questionable. But yeah, Mind Seer, the damage from Mind Seer is really poopy. It's only pretty much good for generating Insanity and allowing you to cast Searing Nightmare currently, right? But you have to take it now, right? And then you get your Silence, and you have to take that because you have to take Dispersion pretty much. So I don't love when they do things like this, but again, this is a first draft. Things might change. And there are, like I said before, the fact that you can just not take something as key as Vampiric Touch and you just go down like this side of the tree, you can build a full build that just has no Vampiric Touch. And actually, while we're up here, just by taking Mindseer, you can take Misery, and you can have Misery without having Vampiric Touch. I don't know how that's supposed to work, because Misery only affects Vampiric Touch, right? It's not like you can press Shadow Word Pain and it'll also apply Vampiric Touch, because first off, you don't have Vampiric Touch, right? So this is a very weird, probably an oversight. Don't know why this exists and what happens. Is this just a wasted talent point at this point? So yeah, there are some bugs still, like, and I don't know how this got to this point where they can push it to everybody and be like, yeah, check this out, when there's something as very wrong as this, right? Because there's no world where you ever take Misery that you don't take Vampiric Touch. And it could be as well, let me add a caveat here, it could be that Wowhead allows you to take Misery because we don't actually have, like, the game to try these things out with, how it's actually implemented. We just have, like, the idea behind stuff. And so it could be that you're not allowed to choose Misery unless you've chosen Vampiric Touch as well. So this choice node right here, I can just swap back and forth, but it could be that if you only take Mindseer and you don't have Vampiric Touch, it forces you to take Searing Nightmare. Or that's your only choice, you just can't choose Misery, but you can or cannot take Searing Nightmare. In which case, that would make more sense that that this is here. This would just not become a choice node, and it would just be a Searing Nightmare node, right? That you can choose to put a point into if you want. So that would make more sense, but as of right now, if you can do this, where you can just not take Vampiric Touch, but you can take Misery, then that's fundamentally broken, right? That's just a wasted point. So there are things like that in the tree where, yeah, obviously it's a first draft, probably going to change. Maybe just an oversight, maybe we understand it wrong, all sorts of things, right? So, yeah, so we got Silence, and then finally over here we've got Fortress of the Mind, right? Fortress of the Mind, probably something that you're going to take both ranks in most of the time. Mind Blast is really strong, and there's stuff down below that make Mind Blast and Mind Flay and stuff like that be more powerful. So you'll likely spend 2 points here anyway. And then let's move on to the next row. Let me take Vampiric Touch real quick and Mind Bomb so I can click on these. Okay, so we've got Vampiric Embrace, and depending, I could see a world where you don't take Vampiric Embrace. All it opens up is Hallucinations, which is pretty good, right? You'd like to have your Power Word Shields giving you Insanity. That's kind of like an understated nice effect that we've had that's been passive for a while. Having your Power Word Shield give you 6 Insanity during combat has been nice. It gives you a reason to press Power Word Shield beyond just getting the shield and the body and soul speed boost. So having Hallucinations would be nice, not necessarily necessary, but it would be nice. And then Sand Lane is way over here, not connected to anything, because you probably won't take it most of the time. And like I was gonna say, with a certain build on the Priest tree, like maybe you take Prayer of Mending, Renew, Renewed Faith, and Benediction, stuff like that. Maybe you go pretty heavy on the Priest side. With that, you may not need something like Vampiric Embrace, in which case you can spend more of your points towards the damage on the Shadow tree and less towards the healing, because you pick up the healing on the Priest tree. And if you're going for pure damage, you could just skip this left side with a Vampiric Embrace and skip the left side of the Priest tree as well. Just have it all on the right and all on the damage spells over here, which is an option. And I think probably, at least in the beginning of Dragonflight, people are going to be very, very much pigeonholed into just doing DPS, when I think that there is a lot of opportunity for some sweet hybrid builds here. Okay, so then you have Vampiric Embrace. Next, you've got Unfurling Darkness. This is pretty cool, and it's not attached to anything, so if you end up playing a Vampiric Touch, Unfurling Darkness, maybe Psychic Link, and some of these shadowy apparitions builds, something like that. That could be pretty cool. It could really harken back to the BFA Shadow Priest, where you have all these apparitions coming out of you doing a ton of damage and generating a ton of insanity. So that's pretty cool that you can have these sweet Vampiric Touch builds. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Vampiric Insight, this is a cool one. Vampiric Touch periodic damage has a chance to reset the remaining cooldown on Mind Blast and cause your next Mind Blast to be instant. So this is pretty sweet. Every time Vampiric Touch ticks, it's going to have some small chance. And this just says has a chance, so it could be a big chance, but likely it's going to be very small. Yeah, to where you'll just get a free instant cast Mind Blast. This is basically replacing Dark Thoughts. And I think this is a pretty good change. It's going to be pretty sweet, and it's right in the middle of the tree. You have to take this if you want to take things like Void Eruption, which, you're most likely going to take this, right? And yeah, it's right in the middle of the tree. It's like Power Infusion over here, where it's a very core thing to take. They really want people to be playing with this, I guess, so you have to take this if you want to access the bottom of the tree, because these two sides of the tree just end right here. So this is going to be a must in every build, because you're not going to be able to get to the bottom without it. So this will be a fun one to play around. Then you've got Last Word, like I said before. Probably one of those things where you only take it if you really need kicks. Shadow Priests are not really known for kicking, so probably going to be a dead talent most of the time, but maybe you take it occasionally. And then, yeah, Dispersion, pretty much a guarantee over here. Especially for any raid fight, you're pretty much always going to take Dispersion. Psychic Horror, pretty cool. Intangibility, cool that it's way over here. I think putting Intangibility and Sand Lane way on the edges like that was a good move. And it's interesting that these were on the same row in the old talent tree, and they're still on the same row in the new talent tree, because they're very similar. And honestly, yeah, it's just good that they don't lock anything else off, and they're kind of off here on the edge. It would be cool if you could take Sand Lane as well as like if it was a travel node, like if it was where Vampiric Insight is, for example, and maybe you swap Vampiric Embrace and Mind Bomb right here, so you could go Vampiric Touch, Vampiric Embrace, and then Sand Lane, and you're like pretty much guaranteed to have Sand Lane in most of your builds. That'd be really cool, but it would probably be too strong. You know, it's a pretty big buff to Vampiric Embrace. Although, a lot of people just don't press Vampiric Embrace, so maybe it wouldn't be as impactful to a lot of people. Okay, so then next, let's look at this row. Yeah, we've got Sand Lane. Next, we have Hallucinations. And then Shadowy Apparitions, which is a talent now. So this is an interesting change. In the past, Shadowy Apparitions were just guaranteed, right? It was just a passive spell that you always had. But now you can choose not to have it, which is going to make our Insanity generation really weird. If you don't have any Shadowy Apparitions, you're going to have less Insanity, right? Unless you like change some other stuff around. Next we have Void Eruption, which is a huge key part of Shadow Priest, has been for a long time. But I've seen some builds floating around already on Twitter that don't take it, so maybe in the future, Void Eruption is not the go-to Shadow thing. Although, why would they change Void Speak to where you can speak in actual English or whatever, or in your default language, and then make it so that you're not going to play Void Eruption very often? That'd be a weird change to me. So I'm sure that most people will play Void Eruption. Next, you've got Monomania. This one's pretty cool. While channeling Mind Flayer Mindseer, the periodic rate of your Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain on your current target is increased by 100%. Mind Blast gains 1 additional charge. So this is going to give you 2 charges of Mind Blast baseline, which is similar to, I think it was called Shadow Word Void or something back in BFA. So this is going to give you 2 charges of Mind Blast, like you get when you're in Void Eruption. And the active side of this, I don't really love, because it says while channeling Mind Flayer Mindseer. Just that one sentence segment is bad. I really don't want to be channeling Mind Flayer Mindseer pretty much ever if I can avoid it. Although, if it turns out that Searing Nightmare, Mind Sear are still the go-to AoE play, then this is going to be a little okay, because it's just going to mean that your Vampiric Touches and your Shadow Word Pains are going to tick twice as fast on the thing that you're currently channeling on, which is not, I mean, honestly, that's a pretty small active benefit, right? The additional charge of Mind Blast, though, that's pretty huge. So Monomania, that's pretty cool. Psychic Horror, we all know what Psychic Horror is. Single target stun for 4 seconds. Intangibility, again, pretty cool, but it's way over here on the side, so you may or may not ever take it. But it's cool that it's still in the tree. I think it's a cool talent, but maybe a bit of a waste. Okay, next. We've got Psychic Link on this next row, which is just the same as it was before. Mind Blast deals 30 or 60% of its damage to all other targets afflicted by your Vampiric Touch within 40 yards. Again, first draft tree, so these numbers may be different in the future, but that's pretty cool. I can see some sweet, like I said before, I can see some sweet Shadowy Apparitions, Vampiric Touch, Misery, Psychic Link builds, especially when you start to get down below. So this might be something that people play a lot. Auspicious Spirits, same as the previous talent, where your Shadowy Apparitions deal 15% increased damage and generate 2 Insanity instead of 1. So twice as much Insanity generation from your spirits, which is cool. Your apparitions, I mean. Next, we have a choice between Hungering Void and Surrender to Madness. This talent node is basically useless. I don't know why this is a choice. Pretty much always, you're not going to take Surrender to Madness for the exact same reasons that you don't take it right now. Hungering Void is just way better. Right? Surrender to Madness, I think I've talked about this in the past, but there are some changes they could make to Surrender to Madness that would make it something that I would consider using. But as of right now, it's just never worth the risk. And if you are going to use it, if you, like, let's say you do take Surrender to Madness, you have a buff, what is it, 30 seconds? You put this buff on something for 30 seconds. You know how hard it is, especially in like Mythic Plus? So first off, single target, you would never use it, right? Like a single target raid boss, you would never use it because the boss will die. But in like Mythic Plus, where you might use this to get more void forms, you know how hard it is to predict 30 seconds ahead of when a mob is going to die, especially when you've got affixes like Bolstering that, you know, make the time to die for the mob suddenly jump from 2 seconds to 40 seconds because it got 9 stacks of Bolstering. Things like that where, yeah, just the basic design of Surrender to Madness right now is just completely flawed. No one would ever, well, I'll put a little asterisk there, not no one, but you should, it's just never worth it to be like, yeah, I'll risk dying for a little bit extra damage. Dying is 0 DPS, right? Why would you ever risk 0 DPS for maybe plus 200 or whatever? So yeah, Surrender to Madness right now, and for anyone who may have any say in this, Surrender to Madness, one huge change that I would recommend to this to make it more worth choosing would be, instead of dying if the target does not die, maybe you take 50% of your max health in damage, right? So it's still very punishing, and it's still likely to kill you sometimes, but it's not guaranteed to kill you, and you could plan around that. You could be like, okay, I'm on a single target raid boss, I want to get another void form off, I'm going to hit Surrender to Madness, take a lot of healing from my healers so that I stay topped, and then I'm going to take a huge chunk of my health on purpose so that I can get this extra damage out. I think that still fits with the Surrender to Madness idea of like the Shadow Priest is like willing to sacrifice stuff from themselves to do extra damage. So I think that fits like lore-wise. It's just that right now, way too punishing for way too little benefit. So that's what I would change. This is pretty much guaranteed. If you're going to be taking Void Eruption and you're going to choose one of these two, as of right now, you're guaranteed going to be taking Hungering Void unless there's like something really crazy that makes you want to take Surrender to Madness. It's just not worth it. Next, we have Damnation. Damnation is attached to Monomania, so you have to take Monomania to take it. And then we've got Void Touched. This is just basically like one of the benefits of Dissonant Echoes. So Void Touched, while not in Void form, Mind Flay has a 5 to 10% chance to allow you to cast Void Bolt. This is pretty cool. Um, Getting more Void Bolts is sweet, especially if you can take this and take Hungering Void to make them take 10% increased damage from your Void Bolts. This will just be a nice little random 10% damage debuff to the target, which is cool. He'll probably take this a lot, especially because these two talents, Psychic Link and Void Touched, are the only two that let you get to the very bottom, which is where all the beefy stuff is. So yeah, for pretty much all single target builds, you're going to be playing Void Touched. And then next we've got Shadow Crash. So at this point, the tree kind of splits into AoE, which is on the left, and single target, which is on the right. And it's not exactly like that, but it's mostly like that. So for example, like on the left, we have like Shadowy Apparitions, Psychic Link, Shadow Crash. All of those are like more multi-target oriented. So yeah, we've got Shadow Crash, and then on the right, we've got like Monomania, Void Touched, Void Torrent. All of those are all very single target oriented. So yeah, so we have Shadow Crash over here. Nothing changed about it that I can see. Ancient Madness, which is cool that you can have Hungering Void and Ancient Madness. That's going to be really sweet. And I could see Shadow Priests back in BFA when we had the Azurite Beam and we had the, what was it called? The BFA Azurite trait that gave you like over 100% crit after you finished a long Void form. Dang, I wish I remembered what that was called. Whatever that was called, that thing, plus your Ancient Madness, plus your Azurite Beam, where you were guaranteed just a ton of crits. That was super, super fun, and I could see something similar to that being the case by taking Ancient Madness, by getting Ancient Madness on top of Hungering Void, or technically Surrender to Madness too, but you're not going to take that. So could be really cool that it's cool that you can have both. You can have good single target and you get this extra little critical strike buff when you start Void form. Next we've got Malediction, which reduces the cooldown of Damnation by 15 seconds. One thing I'll mention, it's a little weird that Damnation is over here on the right when it's like about applying all your dots instantly, which I guess you can only do to one target, which makes sense that it's more of a single target thing, but usually if you play Damnation, it's so that you can not spend as many globals dotting things up, right? So yeah, this reduces the cooldown of it by 15 seconds. Then you've got Void Torrent. I know a lot of people don't like Void Torrent. I know a lot of people do though. And so it is not great in my opinion that it's still here, mostly because it's a channel. I really, as you might be able to tell, I don't love these channels, Mindflay, Mindseer, Void Torrent. Don't love that you just have to sit there and do nothing for a second. It can be nice to get a little break, but I don't love when it's like part of our main rotation. I like playing fast and swapping between spells like crazy, so not super excited that it's going to be like forced into any single target build basically. And then at the bottom of the tree, okay, so up to this point you have to spend 20 points before you can get any of these final ones. At the bottom of the tree here, on the left we've got Mental Fortitude. Healing from Vampiric Touch when you are at maximum health will shield you for the same amount. Shield cannot exceed a certain value based on talent rank. So let's say it's just 5k and then 10k for example. If you're at full health, then your Vampiric Touch is still ticking and it's still healing you, right? And in the past, that health has just been overheal and you just don't get it. But now, this is cool that it's going to give you a little extra like bubble shield, very similar to the Azurite trait that just gave you a shield every 30 seconds or whatever. It's going to be similar to that where as long as you've got Vampiric Touches on things, you're going to be shielding yourself a decent amount. So that's pretty cool. And I like that it's 2 ranks, so you can get a bigger shield if you're willing to spend one of your 30 points into it. Then we've got Insidious Ire. While you have Shadow Word Pain, Devouring Plague, and Vampiric Touch active on the same target, your Mind Blast deals 20% or 40% more damage. This is just Talbadar's stratagem, basically. And as of right now, this could be also unintended. Let me just take some of these points, and I'll show you what I was going to say. Right now, it's not attached to anything except from below, right? So you have to take one of the lower talents to get to it at least. But in this talent calculator, that's not the case. You can take points into it without having anything connected to it. And that is not guaranteed to be the case when the game actually comes out. That could just be a Wowhead decided that that's how it's going to work thing. Or it could be that they have insider info from a Blizzard dev or something. But this is not obvious to me that you would be able to take points in this spell without having anything connected to it, especially when there are connections, right? Like at this point, I would expect that you could only put points over here in Mind Devourer, and then you have to take either Rot and Wither or Unleash the Shadows before you could put points in Insidious Ire. But as of right now, that's not how it works. You could put 2 points in here without having anything attached to it. So this is probably one that you'll want to take for sure on single target because it's going to make your Mind Blasts crazy strong. And then next we've got Mind Devourer, right? So your Mind Blast deals increased damage and has a small chance to make your next Devouring Plague cost no insanity. Pretty cool, although Devouring Plague costing no insanity sometimes can throw a wrench into your insanity balance, where you're like, okay, I have 85 insanity, I'm going to drop a Devouring Plague so that I don't overcap, but then right when you're about to do it, it becomes free, so then you drop it and you still have 85 insanity, and then your next spell you waste insanity, right? That's something that is just RNG and isn't you playing bad, but will negatively impact your DPS, right? So that's not great. But yeah, so this is something you'll also likely take in every single target build because of the stuff that it unlocks. Next, we've got Sanguine Teachings. While shielded, Vampiric Touch and Devouring Plague deal 5, 10, 15% additional damage. It's a 3-rank talent. So over on the Priest tree, we only had up to 2-rank talents, and up until this point on the Shadow tree, they also only go up to 2. But at this point, you could put 3 in here, which is a tenth of all your points in the Shadow tree. So that's a pretty big investment. And it's going to be interesting, especially with Mental Fortitude. You're going to be getting a lot of shields as long as you're not taking a lot of damage, right? Which means that your dots are going to do more damage. And so I could see this being a big benefit in easy content, right? Because in really hard content, you're not going to be at 100% HP most of the time, and so you're not going to be getting shields from Mental Fortitude, and so this is really not going to do much. But in like Mythic Plus or something, if you have the tank taking all the damage and the Mythic Plus group taking very, very little damage, then I could see there being times where you're constantly shielded and you're just doing 15% additional damage from Vampiric Touch and Devouring Plague by putting 3 points into Sanguine Teachings. It's pretty cool, but like I said, yeah, probably not going to be a huge, hard content talent that you take. Next, you have Unleash the Shadows. Vampiric Touch critical strikes have a 5 to 10% chance to create a shadowy apparition. This is something that I mentioned in a previous video, where I was like, one way to fix the shadowy apparition thing is to have it come from Vampiric Touch critical strikes. And maybe I didn't mention this in a video, maybe this was just in some Discord chat that I was talking in. But I've had this idea in the past where previously we got shadowy apparitions from crits of Shadow Word Pain, but that had to change once we got Searing Nightmare, because Searing Nightmare letting you put Shadow Word Pain on everything instantly meant that if you still got your shadowy apparitions from those crits, you were just going to instantly get a ton of insanity generation, and it would make Shadow pretty strong. And maybe that would be a good change, honestly. I would be down for all that insanity gen right off the bat. But, so they had to swap it over to something else. Vampiric Touch made sense because it's pretty much attached to Shadow Word Pain. They're thought of very similarly. And it was cool that they added these generators, right? Devouring Plague and Void Bolt and Mind Blast, where you have to press those to get them. And I think it's really cool that they're adding back a little bit of the passive side of it, where just being lucky and getting these Vampiric Touch critical strikes, and maybe you even play Ancient Madness to get more of these, will just give you additional shadowy apparitions, and you'll get more of those little floaty ghosts that people love so much. So I think this is cool. I think it'd be cool to play Unleash the Shadows more, although I don't see it really being in most single target builds, because I don't think you're going to get this far to the left in most single target builds. Then we have Rot and Wither. This one I do not like very much. Mind Flay and Mind Sear damage has a 5% chance to extend Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain by 2 or 4 seconds. Again, this is the same problem where you have to sit there and channel, which means you're not mobile, you're not pressing other spells, you're just literally AFK, hands off the keyboard, talking to your friends, right? So I don't love that this is based around those things, and the benefit that you get from it, extending your Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain, no one cares, right? If you're playing Misery, for example, you're gonna be refreshing these anyway. This is already something that it's like, yeah, nobody cares about this unless if this percent chance was way higher, like if let's say it was 50%, and maybe you play Searing Nightmare again like crazy, so you're just spamming a Mind Seer into a giant group. It would be maybe cool if you could get your Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain durations to like a minute or something from this. But as it stands, and I want to mention, I don't think that that's how it's going to be. I think that this is how it's probably going to be, and I think the way it stands right now is bad. So I would only take this if you have to take this to get Insidious Ire. Is pretty much that's pretty much the only time I would take this. Or maybe you have to take this to get down to this Living Shadow, which is very strong. So we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, this is again a travel node where it's like, really this benefit is garbage. You would probably only put 1 point in it if you have to, and then only 2 if you absolutely have to get to one of these other spells. And because Insidious Ire, it's not guaranteed that you can put points in it without anything connected. If you have to connect something, then in single target builds, you're going to be connecting this Rotten Wither, almost guaranteed. And it's a cool little throwback to the BFA dungeon under Rot, where she goes Rotten Wither. I like that. Okay, next we've got Abyssal Knowledge. Monomania also increases the critical strike chance of Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch by 5, 10, or 15%. This is sad that you're not going to be able to play Abyssal Knowledge with Unleash the Shadows. Usually, I guess you can technically, if you go like 2 here, 3 here, 2 here, 2 here, you could do this, but then you don't have, it's not great. Although you can do it, unless you have to put points into Rotten Wither to get Insidious Ire. In which case, you could only have 1 point in Unleash the Shadows, because then you're stuck at, unless you change stuff up here, I guess, because then you'd be at 30. So, yeah, so Monomania, pretty cool, but not great. Where is it? Up here? Yeah, right here. Again, you have to channel, so it's not great. But the fact that it also increases the critical strike chance is okay. And you're probably going to be taking Monomania anyway. So yeah, this is pretty much just going to be passive damage increase between Abyssal Knowledge and Monomania, because what Abyssal Knowledge allows you to take is one of these idols, which we'll talk about in a second. And these idols are like going to be your keystone talents that you're pretty much guaranteed to take in a single target situation. So that's what Abyssal Knowledge does. Now let's talk about the final row. I'll scroll down a little bit so it's not at the bottom of the screen. This final row of stuff, which is like your very strongest ultimate Shadow Priest spells. Okay, so on the left, we've got Idol of N'Zoth, so this is a choice between these 2 idols. You can choose Idol of N'Zoth, which damage dealt by Shadow Word Pain, Vampiric Touch, and Devouring Plague has a 20% chance to apply Echoing Void, the corruption from BFA. Each time Echoing Void is applied, it has a chance to collapse, dealing shadow damage to all nearby enemies until no stacks remain. So what this is going to do is, as your dots tick, right, they're going to randomly get a chance to apply a stack of Echoing Void, and then as those stacks build up, they're not going to explode, not going to explode, not going to explode. Maybe you get to 3, 5, 7 stacks or something, and then you get a lucky one, which causes them to collapse, and they'll all explode. Boom, 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 and it does like a bunch of damage. This could be really cool, and the fact that it is independent, you can have like these dots on 20 different targets, and they're all building stacks independent of each other. I think that's really cool. Although one of my concerns is what's going to happen if the target dies before your Echoing Voids collapse. What I think would be cool is maybe they jump to a nearby target, or maybe they all just go off instantly, kind of like a target that dies with a Seed of Corruption on it. It just pops instead of disappearing. So something like that would be cool. That's one of the things that I worry about, though, is that the target will just die with all these Echoing Voids on it, and it just will do nothing, and then you just lose a bunch of damage. And then the other option you have is Idol of Yasarj, or Yasharj, or however you say it. And this one is not very clear, although I have this other tab up here that I'll tab over to in a second. Shadow Fiend causes you to gain a benefit based on your target's current emotional state. what the heck does that mean, right? Well, Blizzard clarified, and this is what it means. So, Idol of Yasharj will receive a new tooltip as we get closer to Dragonflight. In the meantime, here's a breakdown of what it does. Basically, you'll get a buff when Shadow Fiend is out, depending on what's going on with your target, right? So, if your target is, it's kind of like IQD, where it does different things depending on what's going on with your target. So, if your target is above 80% health, you're going to do increased damage while Shadow Fiend is active. That's cool, in my opinion. That's going to be a nice, it's like the opposite of an Execute, where you're doing extra damage for the first, 5 minutes, or not 5 minutes, first 1 minute of a fight when the boss is above 80% health, right? And then we've got, if the target is enraged, then you'll get this buff called Anger. The last buff is called Pride. I don't know if I said that. You'll get this buff called Anger, which purges the enrage effect and increases your haste while Shadow Fiend is active. So there has been some confusion where people are like, how am I supposed to purge and enrage? I don't know, but the way I interpret this is that this will be the purge. So when something is enraged and you send out your Shadow Fiend will dispel the enrage, is my guess. And maybe it's not your Shadow Fiend that dispels it, maybe it's this idle talent that dispels it, but regardless of what it is, at least to me, it sounds like this enrage dispel is going to be built into this talent in some form, where they're not going to change your Mind Soothe to be a Soothe, an Enrage Dispel, or something like that. They won't change Mass Dispel to be an Enrage Dispel. It's just going to be built into this talent, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, increased haste, that's really dope. Next, we've got, if the target is stunned, you get Despair, which you generate Insanity while Shadow Fiend is active. This should technically say you generate more or increased Insanity, because you already generate Insanity. But it might be something like, instead of your Shadow Fiend auto attacks giving you Insanity, you're just going to get like a passive 2 every second or something, which is cool. Next, you've got, if it's feared, you and your Shadow Fiend deal increased damage and do not break fear effects. This could have some sweet implications for Psychic Scream. Maybe you Psychic Scream something, and this would be really good in something like Torghast, but that's not going to be around. So maybe you Psychic Scream 5 guys, and they're all running away, and you just won't break those fear effects. This would be a really big PvP thing, too. You don't break those fear effects, and you're just dealing increased damage, you're balling on those guys, right? And then finally, if none of these things are true, you're below 80% health, and it's not CC'd at all, then you get this buff called Violence, and that just increases the duration of Shadow Fiend. And then there's this priority order. So if something is stunned and enraged, then it goes Anger, and then Despair, and then Fear. And then if it's not CC'd at all, then it does Pride, if the thing is above 80% health. And if none of those, then it's going to do Violence, right? So if something's feared and stunned, but it's not enraged, then it'll give you the Despair one. But yeah, it's basically things that are CC'd, you'll get those buffs before you get the other buffs, right? So that's how the Idol of Yasharj works. I think in pretty much every case that you're going to get to this point, you're going to take Idol of N'Zoth, because you're going to have a lot of Vampiric Touch, Misery, Searing Nightmare, Shadowy Apparition, Psychic Link type stuff, where it's like you're in Mythic Plus trying to hit a bunch of targets all at the same time, so Idol of N'Zoth is going to be really strong. And Idol of Yasharj, unless you build some crazy Shadow Flame build that's like really strong, I just don't see it, unless it's like tuned really high, being super valuable. Although it could go either way, I guess, but the Echoing Void thing, I think, could be really strong in mass AoE. Next, we have Void Apparitions. This is a cool little thing. Shadowy Apparitions have a 10% chance to become infused with the Void, dealing 20% additional damage. Not a very strong talent right off the bat. The 10% chance is pretty low, and they already don't do very much damage. So 20% of like 100 damage, you get 120 damage. Who cares? That's like nothing still. But I think probably the coolest part of this talent is going to be what the animation is when one of these does get a proc, right? Maybe your regular Shadowy Apparitions are like the see-through purple that they are currently, and then one of these Void Apparitions comes out and it's got like tentacles coming out of it or something, and you're like, oh, that one's going to hit extra hard, sweet, right? it's RNG, which isn't great, but and unless you have like some crazy apparitions build, this could be really good with like a crazy apparitions build that's doing a ton of damage because you get an extra 20% damage. But most of the time, I don't know if this is going to be that strong. Next, we have Living Shadow, which is just what our 4-piece is right now, basically, but it's a little different. Consuming Vampiric Insight causes your shadow to animate after a moment. For 10 seconds, whenever you cast a spell, your shadow will cast a similar spell. So I'm not sure if the plan is to still have this giant purple void guy who comes out of your head, right? I would really like it if it looked kind of like a mirror image that's just like completely black, or like really, really dark purple that's just like following you around and casting exactly what you cast, or similar things to what you cast. But it could just be one of those ones that comes out of your head, looks really goofy. But this would probably be really strong. It just casts a similar spell to whatever you cast, depending on how it's tuned. If it does like 100% of the same damage, it could be really strong. If it does like 20%, you would never take it, right? And that's when you consume Vampiric Insight, which is the... where is Vampiric Insight? Let's see real quick. Vampiric Insight. Don't remember what that does. Oh, right here. Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's when you... Yeah, it's the same as your 4-piece currently, where you use a an instant cast Mind Blast gives you your Living Shadow. That's basically what this is as well. When you use your instant cast Mind Blast, you're going to get this Living Shadow still. Okay, so then next we've got Idolic Intuition, I think is how you say that, which is just Vampiric Insight has a greater chance to occur. This is going to mean, and this is a 2-rank talent as well, so it could be like a really high chance to occur. This means you're just going to be spamming instant cast Mind Blast like crazy, which maybe with Shadowflame Prism could be really cool. And maybe with Psychic Link could be really cool. It just sucks that it's way on the opposite side, and so you're going to like, maybe you build down to like Psychic Link, maybe you don't take Ancient Madness, maybe you don't take Hungering Void, and then maybe you get some points in Idolic Intuition, so then you can do some crazy, especially with this Insidious Ire, maybe you get, maybe like something like this. So you're doing like extra damage from your Mind Blasts, and you have a greater chance to get those instant cast ones, and it's being echoed to everything within 40 yards, so there's a Vampiric Touch on it. This could be a cool idea, but yeah, without getting Psychic Link, this gets kind of weird. And then, although it's okay, especially if you can have Shadowflame Prism, and Mind Blast is a really strong spell anyway, so maybe worth taking. And then next we've got the final one, which is Idol of Cthulhu, which Mind Flay and Mind Seer have a chance to spawn a Void Tendril or Void Lasher that channels at your target for 15 seconds, generating 3 insanity every 1 second. Not sure why it signifies a difference between a Void Tendril and a Void Lasher. I wonder if maybe one casts Mind Seer and one casts Mind Flay. In which case, this tooltip should be a little different, unless the one that casts Mind Flay or Mind Seer is not actually casting Mind Seer. It's just giving you a default 3 insanity. Because with the way Mind Seer works right now, you get 1 insanity for every target hit. So if you're hitting 20 targets, it would be giving you 20 insanity every tick. And if that is not true with this Mind Seer from this Void Lasher, then that would be a little weird. It wouldn't be the same Mind Seer, right? But I could see that being the case, because that would be a lot of insanity generation, and it'd be really strong. So this is basically Eternal Call to the Void. Next, we've got Idol of Yogg-Saron. After conjuring 50 shadowy apparitions, you summon a Thing from Beyond that serves you for 20 seconds. The Thing from Beyond blasts enemies for shadow damage. So when I first read this and I didn't see that it lasts for 20 seconds, I thought it would just be like a kamikaze guy that spawns and runs in there, like the old Thing from Beyond from Corruption, that would just chase you and explode. I figured it'd be like that and do AoE damage. But the fact that it lasts for 20 seconds makes me think that it's probably just going to be like similar to the Living Shadow, just something that like, or it's probably going to be very similar to the Torghast power, where when you kill something with Shadow or Death, you get this little void guy who just shoots things at people. It'll probably be like that, where the guy just sits there and shoots out all these spells that go and do AoE damage or whatever, and not necessarily AoE damage. I'm just assuming it probably will be single target actually. But yeah, so this is based on however many Shadowy apparitions you get. So those shadowy apparitions will come from potentially Vampiric Touch critical strikes, and more likely all of your Mind Devourer procs, your Vampiric Insight procs, your Idolic Intuition, where you're going to just have a ton of these Mind Blasts generating all of these guys, right? So that's pretty much all of these things. I am considering making a video in the future where I go more in depth on builds that I think could be really cool. I realized this video was a little long, so I apologize. But there's a lot to say about this, and it's the first big change coming to Dragonflight, so I'm excited. So if you liked the video, make sure you click the like button. If you really liked it, feel free to subscribe, maybe share it with your friends, and let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I know a lot of people are really hating Searing Nightmare. I know there's a lot of controversy around Power Infusion. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions, maybe some sweet builds that you've found. Feel free to share those with me. You can join my Discord in the description, post a link somewhere, and I'll go check those things out. But anyway, that's going to be it for me, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!